great to have you with us for another show that tackles matters African. And tonight we host Professor Calestous Juma. He is a keen scientist and he's based at Harvard University. He gives us his insights into agriculture, science and technology, innovation, climate change, and Africa. We get to hear from you as well. You share your views with us. And as always, we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. Tonight on the show, we're happy to host Professor Calestous Juma. Now, he's Professor of the Practice of International Development and Director of the Science, Technology and Globalization Project at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He directs the Agricultural Innovation in Africa project, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and also serves as the faculty chair of the Innovation for Economic Development Executive Program. Juma is a former executive secretary of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and a founding director of the African Center for Technology Studies in Nairobi. He's co-chair of the African Union's high-level panel on science, technology and innovation and a jury member of the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering. He was Chancellor of the University of Guyana and has been elected to serve several scientific academies, including the Royal Society of London, the US National Academy of Sciences, the World Academy of Sciences, the UK Royal Academy of Engineering, and the African Academy of Sciences. He's won several international awards for his work on sustainable development. He also holds a doctorate in science and technology policy studies and has written widely on science, technology, and environmental matters. Juma serves on the boards of several international bodies and is editor of the International Journal of Technology and Globalization and the International Journal of Biotechnology. His latest book, The New Harvest: Agricultural Innovation in Africa, was published by Oxford University Press in 2011. He's currently working on books on engineering for development and resistance to new technologies. Let's get his insights into Africa. Calestous, we're very excited to have you on the Africa Leadership Dialogues, particularly because of your focus, your work in the areas of science, agriculture, climate change, and so many other issues that are of importance to the African continent that we don't seem to engage enough about. Let's start with agriculture. Everybody says and everybody knows it offers huge potential for Africa. And yet in so many ways, we can't seem to close the gap between the potential and the possibility. There's just a huge gap. What must we do to transform this?
Agriculture, as the word implies, is a culture. And that means that it involves many other things beyond just putting a seed in the ground and seeing it grow. Because you need to buy the seed, you need credit as a farmer. That means the Minister for Finance needs to be able to provide credit to farmers. After you grow it, you need a road to move the produce. So that means the Minister for Roads has a role in agriculture. If it's going to be stored, you need energy to power the storage. So the Minister for Energy has a role to play as well. So agriculture is one of those areas where you need high-level coordination because of the different ministries that contribute to the production of crops, their transportation, their processing, and their sale. And that's why we have not been able to bridge the gap, because we tend to look at it simply as producing food rather than transforming the economy, because it is about transforming the whole economy. So the only way to bridge that gap is to get high-level political leadership to coordinate, because the Minister for Agriculture cannot tell the Minister for Roads, to build a road somewhere. That has to come from a coordinated decision within cabinet. And so it's only those countries that have that coordinated approach that have been able to bridge the gap.
Let's go to the whole idea of large-scale farming versus, the small holders that we see across the continent, really, all over the place. It seems that there's an argument that unless we truly embrace large-scale farming, we can't transform the food security situations in our countries. Do you buy into that idea?
Actually, that's a myth. Large-scale farms work because they happen to be where there is infrastructure. Large-scale farmers are also politically more influential, so they can put pressure on ministers to extend irrigation, to build a road, to create a market. Small-scale farmers can't do that. So what is needed is, in fact, to give small-scale farmers the same level of influence so they can get support for transportation, energy, irrigation, and in many cases, telecommunication, because they have to communicate with the buyers. But that's being solved with mobile phones. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to transition to being large-scale farmers. We need to see what large-scale farmers have that makes them function, which is the infrastructure, the support, and the incentives, and give those to small-scale farmers. In fact, if you look at India, China, many of these countries have radically transformed their agriculture, but it's been through small-scale farmers, because they provided the support structures for them.
Let's go to the issue of GMOs. And I've seen you take this issue up on social media platforms once in a while. What's your position on the use of GMOs?
GMOs are just a technique for solving specific problems. Say you have a pest that you cannot control using pesticides, because pesticides are too expensive and polluting to the environment. So you modify the seed so that the seed is immune to the pests. When the pests eat it, the pests die. And these seeds are very specific to specific pests. So that's just a tool to control pests. But it's not a general theme that GMOs are not everything. There are different applications for different needs. There is work that's going on in Kenya right now, in East Africa, to develop new varieties that are resistant to drought, that allow the seeds to use less water, could be tolerant to drought. Again, that's a very specific solutions. When those seeds become available, they will be ideal for areas that are dry, not for everybody. If you are in Kisii, you probably won't need those kinds of seeds. If you're in a place where you don't have pests, you don't need the pest-resistant seeds. So people have politicized it, but it's actually a very straightforward issue. You give the farmers the choice. And if you give a farmer the choice between pesticides that are very expensive and polluting, where they have to spray 12 times a year if it's cotton, or a cotton seed that they maybe spray only twice or 3 times a year, farmers are likely to choose the GM seed because they will save the time on spraying. So my argument is not that I'm pro-GMOs. I'm just simply saying, let's not exclude it because of ideology. Let's give the farmers a choice. And
let them make their decision.
Let the farmers make that decision.
Why do you think there's so much fear and a very big and powerful lobby group against GMOs?
The fear started in Europe, was spread out of Europe because the early products from the US were being sold to the Europeans. Europeans felt that they already were overproducing, so they did not need new technologies to improve production. So they rejected, and on that account, I always say that Europeans had a right to reject those products because they felt they were already overproducing. But I think it was unethical for them then to go and rally African countries to join them in rejecting the products when Africa's problem was different. Mm-hmm. Africa's problem was dealing with the pests, underproducing. So Africans needed those techniques, environmental issues. And so I support every country's choice, but I don't support countries going and eliminating the choice of other countries, and that's what Europe has done to Africa.
So you've written this book, and we're going to make some copies available to people on social media. We'll tell you how. The New Harvest, Agricultural Innovation in Africa. Tell us, what basically are you advising African governments to do?
This book was written as a memo to African presidents and was inspired by the work that was done initially by the president of Malawi, the late president of Malawi, Bingwa Mutharika, who, when he became president, he appointed himself the Minister for Agriculture and Food Security, so he could coordinate these different functions and revive agriculture. When he was elected, there was a famine in Malawi. In 2 years, Malawi became a net exporter of food.
It was a bread basket.
Became a bread basket. So it's very clear that if it's coordinated by heads of state, that you can make a difference, and you can make that difference very quickly, as was demonstrated in the case of
just 2 years.
Just in 2 years, he gave subsidies to farmers. And those subsidies went to supporting input for farmers. So that got me thinking that if African presidents can take that leadership on agriculture, and it's important because in Africa, where 70% of the employment comes from agriculture, and up to 30% of the GDP of most African countries comes from agriculture. That means agriculture and the economy are one and the same, which means that it's very hard to get the economy grow without getting agriculture to grow. So I thought that an African president should be primarily focused initially with getting agriculture moving, and that's really what the focus of the book was. And the second message was that it can be done in a generation, because Malawi was able to do it in 2 years. Prior to that, after the genocide in Rwanda, the first thing that the leadership there engaged in was to revive agriculture. So the rapid growth of the revival of Rwandan economy was first through agriculture. The same with Uganda. After the fall of Idi Amin, the first thing that Uganda did under President Museveni was to help revive agriculture. So we've seen that there's evidence that if you focus on agriculture, you can get the economies to grow very quickly, and then you can move into other areas. But it requires this high-level coordination. That's what the focus of the book is. And then there are details like focusing on infrastructure and technical training so that you can train farmers. When you get a job in a factory in a city, if the manager changes the factory, all the workers get trained. Nobody offers that kind of training to farmers.
In fact, many farmers in Africa are locked into cycles of poverty, financial illiteracy, and just, not able to break out of this cyclical pattern. So critical. For those who might say, look at Uganda, look at Rwanda, these are fertile territories, it was easy for them, although for Malawi, certainly that was not the case. But what would you say to a president or leadership that says, for us it's harder, we're trying, we really are trying, and especially particularly, let's look at the Horn of Africa, where we have droughts every now and again, and we see people starving, just the basic issue of food. How would you encourage governments to continue to focus and also deal with naysayers who say, this is harder than you think?
That's where the new technologies come in, where we now have possibilities of developing drought-tolerant crops. These possibilities didn't exist 40, 50 years ago. So if you look at agriculture, in agricultural transformation in India, China, Brazil, it tended to focus on arable areas and rain-fed areas. But because the technologies for breeding drought-tolerant crops didn't exist, and if we did it, it took a very long time to breed those crops. Now, this is where biotechnology offers that possibility, in that we know a lot about how just plants, weeds, are able to survive drought. When a weed survives a drought, it tells you something. It's informing you something, that it has a gene that enables it to withstand drought. It's a job of scientists to find out that gene, to see whether the similar gene might even exist in existing crops, but it's silent. And that's what scientists are starting to find out, that many of these drought tolerance genes actually exist in many of the crops, but they are not active. So the idea of genetic engineering or modification is to activate some of those genes.
What are your views on the traditional crops that we grow in many of our countries? Do you think we need to start thinking differently about what we're actually planting?
Yes, in fact, the answers to Africa's future food security lies in traditional crops. because many of those crops have been adapted to local conditions, very diverse conditions. Worldwide, it's estimated that human beings have consumed roughly food from 10,000 different species. Today, we are probably producing crops out of around only 30 major species. And 60% of the world calories come from just 4 crops. That's rice, wheat, maize, and potatoes. But you look at Africa, you have a very diverse range of indigenous crops. Hundreds of them. In fact, there's a group that has just been set up to try to explore and sequence the genomes of about 100 African indigenous crops, because those crops might offer the secret of how we might adapt to climate change. Because those crops have evolved in Africa. Africa is very diverse. Ecologically, it suffers from drought every now and then. So any crop that can survive in Africa has a chance of withstanding climate change. And therefore, we need to be thinking about Africa as having a reservoir for genetic material that might be extremely essential to help the global food system adapt to climate change. But we have to provide that leadership. And the way we can find that out is to invest in the sciences. Right. Because it doesn't matter how hard you look at a plant. A plant, unfortunately, does not speak to you. So you have to interrogate it, and that process of interrogation is called scientific research.
So we're going to discuss climate change, which is critical. But first, let's take a look at this research, R&D, and we know that some of the most fastest growing economies of the world, or the South Koreas and the rest of them, really invested in R&D when it mattered. We still fail to put our money into these kinds of activities in Africa. In fact, there are those who would argue, and I'm one of them, that we're not even investing in sciences, basic sciences in education enough. We don't have enough engineers, we don't have enough doctors. What would your message be to African governments in terms of, what we need to do to start to turn this around?
There's an important part of that story which we tend to miss. If you look at countries like South Korea, Taiwan, all these newly emerging countries, including Singapore, the first thing they started with was using existing technologies. So they scouted the world to see which technologies were available. And microelectronics was just emerging, had come from the US, invented most in the US and Europe. They harnessed that and started developing new industries, and started to export products. And it's from that revenue that they started investing in research. African countries, unfortunately, have focused more or less on saying we need 1% of the GDP of the economy to be invested in R&D. This is a message that comes from UNESCO, from the scientific community. It's a very misleading message, because if the smaller you are, the smaller GDP is, which means that 1% or 2% is actually meaningless. What we need to do is to find out what's happening worldwide. If you look around worldwide today, scientific and technical knowledge is doubling almost every 14 months, which means that a lot of the ideas that Africa needs to get the economy going are already exist. The story of mobile phone is a good one. We did not invent the mobile phone, but we took it and we have created new industries around it. Now, some of that revenue coming from the mobile phone industry can be reinvested in new R&D, because you have earned some money. And so I think Africa has it backwards, and it's being misled by many of our colleagues in the Western world that are on the cutting edge of research. Because if you are at the frontier of research, you have nothing else to harvest. But if you are a latecomer, you have the latecomer advantages, where you put existing knowledge to use. Right. And then you earn some money, and then you can plow that back into research. So that's one message that we got wrong. The other one is to focus almost entirely on the ministries of science and technology. Whereas if you look in many countries, much of the research is driven in other ministries. For example, in the US, it's Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Energy. And the US does not have a Ministry of Science and Technology, because all the departments of government are involved in research. And that's the kind of attitude I think that African countries need to adopt.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
climate change now. Do we have any idea in Africa as to what is going on, as to what the impact will be on us? Are we prepared for the realities ongoing currently?
Actually, we know.
We do?
Yes.
Well, that's a good first step.
Yes.
Okay.
The reason we know is that if you look at all the predictions of what climate change is likely to do globally, are very similar to what the droughts in Africa have done already. So anybody who is looking for knowledge on how to deal with climate change, the place to look is Africa. If you look at the Sahel drought, was devastating. That's a place to look for ideas.
But are we dealing with it? Are we?
I think we missed the boat about 20 years ago by getting too focused on debating on what was causing it, rather than focusing on what the impacts were. Because if you focused on what the impacts were, you find out that because of the similarities between the impacts of climate change and the impacts of drought or flooding, you already have a lot of lessons you can learn from. The Horn of Africa, when we had the famine, the drought in the 80s, created a new organization called IGAD to respond to a drought. Africa is the only continent that created an organization to respond to what you can describe as the equivalent of climate change. So in that case, I've been arguing that Africans have actually been leading already, but we have not offered that to the global community as a model of what we have done that could offer lessons of how to respond to climate change.
Right, but even looking at the existence of IGAD, and IGAD does numerous things, including monitoring security and so much more. Can we say we've been successful if once again in 2011 you see another drought? Currently we're seeing another drought. At some point, shouldn't we have had a way of equipping the societies and communities who live in these areas to face the realities of climate change so that they're prepared?
What is different now, and that's what's worrisome, is the pace at which it's happening. And the only way you can monitor that pace is to build up capability to monitor changes in the environment. So many countries are now building satellite programs so that you can be able to monitor rainfall, changes in rainfall. If you have a satellite program, you can monitor that almost in real time. And you'll have reliable information seeing which wetlands have dried up. When you see wetland drying up, you can predict that the following year, pastoralists going in that direction are not likely to have a place to graze.
It's foreseeable.
And they may take a different direction, and that gives you a signal that you could have even conflicts with other pastoralists. The one region that is vulnerable to climate change and drought, and yet does not have a space program to help monitor changes in the environment, happens to be the Horn of Africa. And this is an area I've been very interested in. I've had personal conversations with a number of leaders that it's worth investing in it. And the cost of doing it is actually very low because of the reduction in the cost of launching and developing satellites. So that region needs a satellite program.
Fantastic. So we're having talks about having our own space program for instance, the region to be able to deal with these issues, to be informed fully of what's happening. It's fascinating that you've shared that with us. What was the response from the leadership when
Actually, the previous Parliament of Kenya before the election passed a motion to pursue and develop a space program.
Wow.
There is already a draft policy, law, and strategy that was developed by a Parliamentary Committee of Science and Technology that already exists. It sits in the hands of a member of parliament who is still sitting a member of parliament. Dr. Wilbur Otichlo has that document. He's worked with the government. We need to get moving on that issue. I've had private conversations with the presidency of Uganda on it. In January, I had a private conversation with the foreign minister of Ethiopia on the importance of a space program. Other African countries are launching their space programs. Ghana is developing a space program. Probably this year, Angola will launch a satellite. there's a bit of confusion because when you mention space program, people start to think about it's about sending a person to the moon.
Space travel.
And then they start to think, okay, which tribe will be represented?
And then it gets complex.
Then it gets complex. But we are talking about satellites and Earth monitoring. And the technologies now go beyond just satellites. You can now start, for some applications, you can start to think about using drones to monitor the environment. And some countries are already doing that. A country like Nepal is using drones to monitor, particularly changes in the environment that might affect forestry. Other countries like Bangladesh, which is a poorer country than many African countries, has developed a space program to monitor flooding. So many countries are moving in this direction, and our region is the one that is not moving fast enough.
We need to move faster. We're practically at the close of the show. The time has really passed so fast. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to look at the camera and give Africans your message. What do we need to do to really conquer, you know, the next few years and make this the African century? We'll come to that in a moment. But first, you're based here at Harvard University. You travel a lot, you consult a lot. What are your thoughts when you look at Africa, when you talk about Africa, when you're seated with experts and Africa comes up? What do you feel?
I interact with a very new Africa now. In the last 3 years, in 2012, 6 African countries elected engineers for president. And that's Egypt, Tunisia, Ethiopia, Somalia, Angola, and Senegal. Africa today has the highest percentage of presidents trained in the technical sciences of all continents. So you can start to have this conversation with leaders in a way that they understand it. And this excludes other presidents who are not trained in the technical fields but fully understand these issues. Presidents who have been in the business community, presidents who have come from the military where they understand the role of science and technology. President Kagame, for example, who's been a major champion of science and technology, has acquired that expertise and knowledge while he was basically fighting for the freedom of his country. So we have a very different leadership. The challenge that I find usually is when you move from the presidency down to the ministerial level. There you find that most of the activities are less coordinated, very sectoral, and very often don't reflect the full aspirations of the leadership. But usually it's the leaders who get blamed.
Yeah.
What you hear is that, oh, we need better leadership, we need political will. But actually the political will is there, the leadership is there, and the knowledge and awareness is there, because I interact with many of these people on a regular basis, many of these leaders on a regular basis. I just finished preparing a report that hopefully will be discussed by the African Union then at its next summit on science and technology. So I'm aware of their vision, but that vision is not being translated into programs at a ministerial level. At
ministerial level, and we also hear of a lot of bottlenecks in public service and perhaps incentivization somehow, maybe not even monetary, but just buy-in perhaps at every level is critical. Yeah. Calestous, please, your message to Africa at individual level. What do we need to start to do in order to completely take hold of this century?
I think that it's a very interesting moment for Africans, especially young Africans, in that young Africans are now inheriting much larger pools of scientific and technical knowledge than their predecessors had access to. The story of mobile phones, you can replicate that in so many other fields where knowledge is expanding really fast. The most important thing is that young people will need to equip themselves with the capacity to absorb that knowledge. And that has implications on the subjects that they choose to study. That those countries that are steering more of their young people to study the sciences are going to be basically the beneficiaries of this century and even possibly the next one. And so I see already many African countries that are starting to increase the number of universities, technical universities. Those are the countries that have the vision and that are preparing their leaders, the next generation of leaders, to really capture the benefits of being latecomers. This is the advantages of being a latecomer, is that you can move much faster than the front runner because you can learn from them and you can inherit what they have generated before you. And that's really the potential for Africa today, is really to see itself as a beneficiary and a custodian of a large pool of technical knowledge that can be brought to economic transformation.
That's fantastic. Just before we close, Calestous, you have a little gadget here. What is it?
Yes, this is when we talk about this, the advantages of a latecomer and the fact that the technologies are advancing very fast. This is a very simple example of illustration of that. 20 years ago, this is a solar-powered lamp. You put it under the sun, has a battery. In the evening, you turn on the light.
And you have your light.
You have your light. This can make a difference for kids on whether they will pass the exams or not, because with this, they have the opportunity to do their homework. Mm-hmm. I would say 10 years ago, this would have cost about $100. It's now roughly $4 to $5 today, and the price is still dropping. And it's a little example that illustrates that we can now start to do in other fields, like in the energy fields, what we have done in telecommunications. This is just one little example. There are many examples of this kind that they offer advantages, say, for decentralized families, economies, and ethnic communities across Africa that are not connected to the grid.
And these are the majority of Africans in many of our countries. This is the majority of
Africa. And that's the idea of leapfrogging that Africa can do now for energy with devices like this, what it has already done for telecommunications.
Thank you for the example, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Fascinating insights there from Professor Calestous Juma. Thank you, Prof, for making time to talk to the Africa Leadership Dialogues and share such insightful information with us. For instance, did you know that 6 African presidents are engineers? I had no idea. Amazing stuff. Now, we've got some good news for you. We have a few copies of Professor's book, The New Harvest, Agricultural Innovation in Africa. We've got copies to give away, and tomorrow we have a live tweet session with the professor. That'll take place at 2 p.m. East African time. Do join us on Twitter at AfricaLD is the hashtag, and we're giving away some of those books as well tomorrow on Twitter. Right now, let's get to your views on the issues.
This week we asked you, in your view, what are the potential solutions to Africa's agriculture crisis? Nick Miner says, adoption of modern methods of farming, use of certified and well-tested seeds for maximum yields, and ready markets for farmers to sell their produce at good prices. Johnny Massini says, the governments in Africa should work and support research and development and ensure increased production.
Hi, my name is Liz Wayaki from Ongata Rongai, and you're watching Africa Leadership Dialogues. A few solutions to Africa's agricultural crisis would be government-funded education on effective farming practices. A second thing would be to invest and adopt modern, effective and efficient farming techniques to meet the increasing demand for agricultural produce. And a third thing would be research and development in order to ensure increased production.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, at AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Thank you for sharing your perspectives. It's particularly exciting to see so many people passionate about agricultural issues, passionate about science and innovation. And this is exciting for Africa, certainly. Thank you so much for being part of our engagement on Africa Leadership Dialogues. Now to Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we take a look at the best mobile applications in the agriculture sector. This is according to IT News Africa. Starting us off at number 10 is Farming Instructor, a mobile app that provides agriculture information in text, speeches, and animation. With this app, the user can source information related to agriculture as well as share and comment on farming tips. At number 9 is Agriculture, developed by Access Mobile. This analytical tool helps agribusiness trends, manage transactions, cut costs, increase revenues, and mitigate risk. Core product features include agricultural data collection and management. At number 8 is AgroSim, an event simulator able to anticipate the quality and quantity of the productivity of a desired crop by taking into account data related to seed, soil, hydraulic climate, geography, macroeconomy, and the demographic of the targeted area. It provides a virtual representation of the different stages of crop growth and development. At number 7 is Mobile Agribase, a web and SMS mobile app that helps farmers decide when and how to plant crops and select the best crops for a given location. It does so by using climate and weather data. Farmers can also easily connect with customers via SMS, providing information on goods, prices, and quantities for sale. Number 6 is Mshamba, an interactive platform that utilizes the various features of a mobile phone to provide information to farmers on production, harvesting, marketing, credit, weather and climate based on their location and crop or animal preference. It is used by rice farmers in Kenya to help them adapt new technologies. Farmer Connect comes in at number 5. This platform is a cloud-based mobile-enabled platform that delivers personalized agricultural extension services and text or audio information intelligence in local languages to smallholders and farmers. It hosts a one-stop marketplace for agricultural communities. eSoko takes the number 4 spot. eSoko is one of Africa's most popular mobile agriculture platforms for tracking and sharing market intelligence. It links farmers to markets with automatic market prices and offers from buyers, disseminates personalized messages based on crop and location, and manages extension officers and links farmers with SMS messaging. At number 3 is Fisheries. This is a suite of open source mobile and web applications for small-scale fisheries with navigational tools such as a compass and a GPS login and retrieval application. It comprises a virtual marketplace application which displays market prices using open data and the Got Fish Need Fish application which connects agents in the fisheries value chain in real time. At number 2 is Rural e-Market. Developed for rural Africa, Rural e-Market is a simple yet powerful solution to communicate market information using smartphones, tablets, or computers. It is multilingual, easy, quick to adapt, and most of all, affordable for most rural projects. And at number 1 this week is iCow. The iCow platform has a series of dairy agricultural products that are available for a simple menu system. Farmers dial a short code *285# and access a simple menu that guides them on how to subscribe to the various products. After subscribing, the system sends messages to users at intervals depending on the product choice. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
Already we've come to the close of the show. Time does pass so fast on the Africa Leadership Dialogues, and we leave you with a fascinating proverb from Tanzania. The tree that cannot shed its old leaves in the dry season cannot survive the period of drought. That is food for thought. Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.